Hello YouTube and welcome back to The Theory Crafters, a show that dives deep into the lore of Minecraft mods.
You already said that before, you bum.
Anyways, we have just finished the Alex's Cave series and wow, thank you all so much for the love and attention that they have gotten. However, with that series ending for now, it's time for the next chapter of our journey. This mod series will be on Ender's Cataclysm, and there's a lot to cover. This video will be about one of my personal favorite bosses in the mod, the Leviathan. However, before we get started, according to YouTube, only about 26% of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you would like this video and want to see others like it, consider subscribing. It would really help the channel grow and become available to even more people. Thank you all for watching the channel, and here's to another awesome series. Now, without further ado, let's dive deep into the Abyss.
Stop it!
You might be wondering why in the world we're talking about Endermen, the creatures afraid of water, in a video about a city underwater. Well, it might be a stretch, but I believe that the main entities we fight throughout the Sunken City are a form of evolved Endermen. Why, you may ask? Well, at first I was skeptical. When I was testing the endurance of these creatures by the blade of my netherite sword, every single creature from the Sunken City when killed sounded an awful lot like Endermen when they die. Just take a listen. See what I mean? What even are these mobs? They are called Deeplings and have to be a race of Endermen who evolved to not only become tolerant of water, but to thrive in it. If this is the case, how did they even evolve? To answer this question, we should briefly explain the types of evolution in our world, and see if we can identify factors between the Endermen and Deeplings to pinpoint what kind of evolution they underwent. We have identified 4 types of evolution on Earth. The first type we are discussing will be about divergent evolution. This is typically what most people think of when they hear the term evolution, but what is it? Divergent evolution is when species gradually evolve into new species from a common ancestor. The primary reason for animals to undergo divergent evolution would be when occupying different habitats to better thrive within said habitats. The most clear-cut example of divergent evolution would be Darwin's finches of the Galapagos Islands. When their common ancestor, which was likely believed to be the dull-colored grassquit, arrived, the different habitats offered by the Galapagos Islands forced this bird to adapt to their different environments. Some evolved to break open nuts and seeds, others adapted to fruits, leaves, and insects, while some even evolved to use tools. The next type of evolution would be that of convergent evolution. Convergent evolution happens when 2 separate species evolve similar characteristics despite being only distantly related to one another. These species often develop these close characteristics as ways to create solutions to similar problems. Examples of convergent evolution are best described in the traits of different species. The swimming shape of the bodies are all similar between sharks, dolphins, and even ancient ichthyosaurs. The camera-like structure of the eyes that allow the animal to focus on subjects in their field of vision is a trait of mammals, ourselves included, along with octopi and squids. Opposable thumbs are a trait shared by primates, opossums, koalas, and even chameleons and panda bears. Despite these species being very different from one another, even if they do share the same class, they all evolve similar traits to help with similar problems. This is convergent evolution. Parallel evolution is similar to convergent evolution, but differs from this form due to an animal's lineage. While it is true that convergent evolution results in similar traits being evolved in different species, these species do not always share a common ancestor. In the case of parallel evolution, the 2 species in question would have to have their lineages connect back into one common ancestor. The 2 new species should evolve new traits that are nearly identical to one another within different populations that are plagued by similar hardships. Confused? That's alright. I will try to make a simpler analogy for you, as well as for myself. Think of one group of bright yellow lizards. This group will then split off into 2 smaller groups, where Group A goes to a forest environment on the east coast of a given country, and Group B goes to another forest environment on the west coast of that country. The 2 groups are now on completely opposite sides of the country, but both are in forest habitats. Now say that within these forest habitats there's another animal that preys on lizards, and the lizards that move to the forest are sitting ducks because they are bright yellow and are easily spotted by the predator. Given that the 2 species are both plagued with a predator that can easily spot and eat them, they both need to adapt to the environment. To do this, the 2 groups both develop genes that help them survive and both develop a green coloration to hide themselves from the predator. Over generations, the 2 lizards become different species from their original ancestor, but are still related to one another due to the identical traits. They evolved while in different environments under similar circumstances. This is how parallel evolution works, oversimplified, and I hope that it helped you all understand it as it helped me. Finally, the last type of evolution is coevolution, and this happens between extremely distinct species who occupy the same environment. The best way to explain coevolution is when an environment changes outside of the control of the species it holds, and everything in that environment needs to evolve together. Coevolution happens most often in symbiotic relationships, meaning the two species need one another to survive and thrive, and can be seen in nature between a flower and its pollinator. For example, a hummingbird evolved a very long mouth in order to reach the inner nectar of a tube flower and spread its pollen. If the hummingbird suddenly went extinct, the tube flower would not be able to be pollinated and could go extinct too. Phew, that was a lot of information. What were we talking about again? Oh yeah, Minecraft Enderman. The Deeplings in Cataclysm must have had their common ancestor as a type of Enderman, or even the Enderman we see today. Something must have happened to force the Enderman to evolve to be able to live and thrive in the ocean where water is plentiful. But what was it? Well, the Endermen were likely forced into an environment where they couldn't even teleport anywhere without getting wet, so were trapped in a bubble where they couldn't escape. They had to undergo trial and error until they could finally adapt and receive the genes necessary for surviving water contact. If this is how the Endermen adapted and evolved into the Deeplings, what kind of evolution was this? Did you get the answer? Let us know in the comments below. The answer is divergent evolution, because they were forced into a different environment and diverged from their common ancestor of Endermen to become the Deeplings. So now that we have established what the Deeplings are and how they came to be, what is their story? The Deeplings might have been a group of brave Endermen who sailed the seven seas for whatever reason. They could have been pirates or traders that had businesses that needed to be done out on the water. Endermen, of course, were not fond of water, so whatever the reason was they were sailing the ocean had to be good. All was going well until disaster struck, and their ship was caught in the middle of a heavy storm. While the storm didn't sink the ship, it did force all of the Endermen under the deck, including the captain. The captain could not be steering the ship and was not able to lower the anchor before having to duck for cover to protect his sensitive skin from the rain. As a result, nobody was steering the ship and they were at the mercy of the winds. Turns out, the wind was steering the ship in a direction that placed them on a direct collision course with an uncharted island in the middle of the ocean. Once the storm settled, the deck was still far too wet for the Endermen to walk out, so they were stuck waiting until the sun dried the deck for them. Once it inevitably did, the captain went back up to the deck, but at that point it was too late. The ship was speeding towards an island out in the middle of nowhere, and the captain couldn't slow down in time. The captain screamed for his crew to brace themselves, and they had to crash into the island. They were now stranded on an island thousands of kilometers from any other land with no boat. This was made worse by the fact that Endermen couldn't even touch any of the water that surrounded them. They were marooned. Over time, the Endermen had to do what they could to survive. Some held out hope for rescue, while others found waiting futile and decided to take matters into their own hands. Some risked their lives and walked to the shoreline, knowing it would hurt. Surely enough, it did, but an important thing that the Endermen who touched the water noticed was that while it was unbearable pain, it didn't immediately kill the Endermen. Days passed and the same Endermen continued to push their luck. The pain was immense, but the instinct for survival was stronger. This continued until the Enderman went further out into sea and took the biggest leap in their life. He plunged his head into the water, and the survivors of the shipwreck watched in awe. They fully expected their crewmate to be dead, but then they saw the Enderman rise from the water. He had overcome the fear of the ocean. From here, more and more Endermen tried their hands on overcoming the pain that came with the water. While most succeeded and lived to tell the tale, those who weren't resilient enough passed either at sea or due to complications that arised from the sea. Those who never tested the waters let their fears get to them, and died shortly thereafter for various reasons. The strong survived and began growing their population, allowing for the genes of water mastery to make their way through the generations to become an advanced civilization that not only could survive in water, but thrive in it. These became the Deeplings, a species that diverged from Endermen long ago and are fully adapted to life in the sea, but also never lost their touch with the land. They had mastered both land and sea. Perhaps the Deeplings were even responsible for the ocean monuments or the ocean ruins we see in Minecraft today. The Deeplings diversified their labor and took on different roles in their society. Some were fishermen, some took on more combat roles like that of a brute or a warlock, some were priests, and some were just Deeplings. The division of labor helped them survive in any part of the ocean, where even if one group of civilization collapsed, they could move on to a different part. Perhaps the fishermen were prevalent in warm oceans, as in warm ocean ruins we see fishing poles and angular pottery sherds, and some were proficient in other oceans. Truth is, they were so diversified and well adapted to their environment they could go anywhere. While they were surviving in numbers, the Deeplings wanted more. They began to become pirates and looted passing ships by striking the hull of the boat and sinking them. The Deeplings might have been responsible for many of the shipwrecks we see around the world today, and it is possible they looted them for their treasure. It would be unclear as to why they did this, but one day during a pirating endeavor, they would overhear the sailors talk about rumors of an ancient predator, one that is only seen at the depths of the sea. What could it be, they wondered. They began to suspect that this particular ship was on their way to explore this fascinating idea, and wondered if they had a map to it, or even any sort of clue that could suggest its existence. They followed this ship, and at the right moment they struck. Raiding the ship, they rummaged through their belongings just as they have done many times before. However, instead of loot they were trying to get, they wanted answers. When the captain of the ship refused their questions, the Deeplings threatened to sink their ship. The captain, true to his word, continued to refuse, and the Deeplings sent their warlock to take care of the captain, so they could raid his quarters. Surely enough, they seized the map and even the ship itself, going back to their old skills of piloting ships, but only this time they were better. They no longer needed to worry about storms, and they could survive in both land and sea. They were unstoppable. When they arrived where the map took them, it was in the middle of the ocean. Were they tricked? Where was this ancient predator? They dove around the ship. There had to be something they were missing. While swimming under the surface, they noticed something strange and oddly sharp jutting out of the ocean floor. They immediately notified the captain and began excavating the odd artifact. When fully excavated, they believed they had found it, an open jaw sitting on a pedestal, with what appears to be some sort of purple liquid. When they had analyzed it further, the purple fluid was nearly identical to that they found during their deep-sea expeditions. These expeditions showed them that what appears to be a ruined portal of sorts, left behind by a race long gone. It was crying obsidian, but what were its tears made of? Could it have been dimensional tears? The Deeplings built a monument around them. Slowly but surely their vision came to light, an enormous underwater base where they could conduct experiments on the altar in hopes of appeasing it and bringing them what they believed could have aided them in taking over the world. There are many different parts of the Sunken City in the game. All I believe play a role in what experiments the Deeplings were conducting, or at the very least help tell the story of the Sunken City. To simplify things, we will first break down the Sunken City into 7 distinct rooms. The first part of the structure is the entrance of the Sunken City, guarded by 2 Deepling brutes, classified via the weapon they are holding and the Nautilus shell armor they have on their left shoulder. These are clearly meant to deter any visitors from potentially disrupting their desire to appease the Abyssal Altar. Other than that, the entrance lacks any significant lore implications. A common theme we will see in the Sunken City are water channels going throughout the city, but all converging in the center, which is in part 7. The second structure in the Sunken City holds a cell block, where the Deeplings hold many creatures that either aid them in war or act as sacrifices. These creatures are called the Coralsis, creatures seemingly made entirely by coral, likely created artificially as a result of some of the experiments that the Deeplings were conducting to appease the altar. The Coralsis is a creature of no free will, and is often seen being ridden by the Deepling warlocks. It is likely that the Coralsis wasn't enough for the altar, but its usefulness to the Deeplings wouldn't go unnoticed, so they instead just keep the ones they've created locked up for when the time comes to go to war or fight any invaders. While parts 3, 4, and 5 of the building are largely devoid of lore implications, it should be important to mention that structure 4 of the Sunken City is a treasure room, where the Deeplings keep their loot from the looting passing ships who are curious enough to observe the Sunken City, and get dangerously close to understanding what the Deeplings are up to in there. The 2 most important structures of the Sunken City are 6 and 7 from a lore standpoint. Structure 6 is actually a library and a church of sorts, and this is where the importance of the Deepling priest shines. The Deepling priest carries what's called an athame. An athame is a ritualistic double-edged dagger, which is primarily used in pagan and Wiccan rituals. When the Deeplings first found the Abyssal Altar, they became so enamored by it, they began worshipping it in hopes of appeasing a faceless god they wanted to see so badly. This would be considered a form of paganism, as it's a religion worshipping a deity that is not the God of Abraham, which is a central god that acts as roots of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. The athame is the dagger responsible for carrying out paganistic rituals, and given that the Deepling priest carries this dagger, it confirms that the idea that the Deeplings worship something else. They attempt to use this dagger to appease this deity. At the end of Structure 6 is a quartz platform that holds the Altar of Amethyst, another altar in which its use is unclear, at least to the Deeplings. Given that it is shown inside of an amethyst geode, it is clear that the Deeplings place some form of magical emphasis on this crystal. Perhaps it could also be a hint to the player. Lastly, the final and most important structure that is part of the Sunken City is the central dome, which is what holds the Abyssal Altar. Now, in the real world, domes and architecture have quite a bit of significance. For one, it has religious symbolism and is believed to be symbolic of heaven, and is decorated to reflect this idea. In a less religious context, domes can represent the entanglement of the physical and spiritual world. This potentially means that the physical realm and spiritual realm occupy the same space but can never interact. This, I believe, is what's happening with the predator they want to bring back via the Abyssal Altar, where the predator is believed to be in that room but cannot interact with the physical realm. Knowing this, the Deeplings have to open the gateway between the physical and spiritual realm to finally release this monster into the physical realm. But did the Deeplings ever succeed? We know that in Cataclysm, some of the bosses who have to be summoned can be summoned twice before the altar becomes inactive or disappears altogether. This is true of the Leviathan, which is the predator the Deeplings want to bring into the world. For this reason, I don't believe that the Deeplings have ever been able to successfully summon the Leviathan. But if not them, then how can the Leviathan come to the physical dimension? Are the Deeplings on the verge of a breakthrough? I believe so, as to summon the Leviathan in game, you need to craft an Abyssal Sacrifice. This sacrifice is crafted with a nautilus shell in a thame, a chunk of coral, blocks of diamond, iron, gold, and emerald, a block of pure amethyst, and the heart of the sea. The Deeplings have access to all of these things except for the heart of the sea, and they have yet to find one. They were so occupied with pillaging the ships for their treasure, they forgot the real treasure. The treasure map. Every single buried treasure in Minecraft has a heart of the sea inside of it, and the Deeplings just overlooked it. The Heart of the Sea is arguably the most important part of the Abyssal Sacrifice, as it acts as the soul of the sea, and for a sacrifice to work, its soul must be released. The Coralsis never worked as a sacrifice because they were artificially created and have no free will and thus no desire to do anything other than to serve their masters. Their souls don't exist because they weren't created to have a soul. They were created to be sacrificed and later to serve the Deeplings. When you craft the Abyssal Sacrifice, you place it in the jaws of the Abyssal Altar, and the jaw closes. The dimensional rift temporarily opens and the Leviathan comes out. But what even is the Leviathan? The Leviathan is a being of another dimension, with a color scheme identical to crying obsidian, which is what we see in the Nether and Ruin portals. The Leviathan is capable of summoning depth charges and inflicting your player with a flurry of negative effects. The Leviathan can inflict blindness, abyssal burn, abyssal fear, and abyssal curse. While blindness could be chalked up to the fact that being underwater can be blinding, the other three are quite ambiguous. The abyssal burn effect will cause your player to lose health and teleport randomly. Abyssal fear disallows a player from healing, and the abyssal curse can cause lethal damage after some time. While these are quite confusing from a lore standpoint, they can all be chalked up to the Leviathan being a dimensional being who is more powerful than the limits of our dimension allows. To negate these effects, you would need to use the magical properties of the Amethyst Altar and bless the meat of an amethyst crab, further reinforcing that amethyst is a magical crystal in the world of Ender's Cataclysm. The Leviathan can also summon depth charges around the arena. Using its abilities from its native dimension, it can summon things to the dimensional rift you opened when you left the Leviathan through by use of the Abyssal Sacrifice. The Leviathan also takes advantage of a dimensional instability and opens its own gravitational rifts that can suck yourselves and other entities in it, and summon laser beams from those rifts to obliterate you as well as any other unfortunate thing to be caught in that crossfire. The Leviathan can also use its immense tongue to grab you and bring you towards its jaws, but perhaps the most devastating attack that it can do is through its energy beam. Inspired by Godzilla, this attack has to charge up, channeling its dimensional energy through its body into one immense blast that can and probably will kill the offender. However, if a lucky adventurer were to put an end to the dimensional domination of the Leviathan, one would quickly discover that it has an egg. That's right, the Leviathan is pregnant, and once slain, the player can hatch it and raise it as their own. Once the Leviathan is slain and the dimensional rift stabilizes and seals, the dimensional energy dissipates and the world becomes normal again. It is unclear as to how the Deeplings would have tamed this formidable creature if they were to be successful in summoning it, or if they would even be alive at all if they did. The Leviathan is intensely aggressive, and I do not believe that Deeplings would be able to appease it and turn it into the war machine they were hoping for. They wouldn't think that the Leviathan may be pregnant because they don't even know what they were trying to summon, so it rules out the possibility that they were wanting to slay the Leviathan and take the eggs for themselves. To me, it is beyond clear that the Deeplings, as advanced and intelligent that they are, would not have stood a chance if they were successful in summoning the Leviathan, and thus I have to come to the conclusion that they never did. It's probably for the best, because if the Leviathan had destroyed the Deeplings and the city they built for it, it might have been free of its confinement and caused irreversible damage on Minecraft's oceans. The story of the Leviathan and the Sunken city is quite interesting, from the religious and spiritual implications of the Deeplings and their city to how their failures to bring about the Leviathan may have actually saved the world from certain destruction. Does that make the Deeplings a hero? I don't think so. After all, they did intend to summon the Leviathan under the guise that they could tame it and rule the world themselves. Perhaps this is the best ending, as if the Leviathan was tamed and the Deeplings used it to rule the world, the Minecraft would look very different. And if the Leviathan wasn't tamed and destroyed the Deeplings, it could cause havoc in and of itself. This must be the best timeline if it was never summoned by the Deeplings and its power fell into the wrong hands. Next video, you can expect us to go over the ancient factory and the Harbinger. This highly advanced civilization might have succeeded in creating a vessel, but failed to power it. Did they create it from a place of goodwill, or did they create it from a place of malice? Find out in that video. Thank you for watching, and I hope you're excited for the theory videos on Cataclysm. Wait, before you go, be sure to check out our previous series on Alex's Caves, or check out the first episode of Cooking with Piam.